Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be talking about something that I think a lot of people think about, but maybe don't think about consciously. We're going to be talking about what it takes to choose a good CEO.
Right.
We're going to be looking at an article called Mastering the Transition, a blueprint for choosing the right CEO by Haptic R&D Consulting.
Okay.
Now, Haptic R&D Consulting, they're not just another consulting firm. They work specifically to connect businesses with new and upcoming technology, like artificial intelligence and the Internet of Things.
Yeah, and what I find really interesting about this article is that while it is talking about, the very important decision of choosing someone to lead your company, a lot of the points that it makes really resonate with anybody, even if they're not, a business leader themselves.
Yeah, this is something that we can all learn from and grow from.
Yep.
So why is this topic important? Why are we talking about this? Well, aside from the fact that it's interesting and we can all learn something from it, Haptic makes this really intriguing comparison in their article.
Yeah.
They compare choosing a CEO to an artisan honing their craft.
Interesting.
So we're going to get into that a little bit later.
Yeah.
But first, I think it's really important to lay the groundwork and talk about, why does the CEO even matter? What's the big deal?
Right.
Why is choosing the right CEO so important? So to start off, Haptic lays out these 5 key areas where a CEO's impact is really felt.
Okay.
And the first of those is strategic leadership.
Right.
So it's not just about being the head honcho.
Mhm.
Right? It's about actually setting the course of the company.
Yes, exactly. It's about having that vision, being able to anticipate what's coming down the line and then getting everybody on board with that vision.
Right, because if the CEO's vision is off,
Yeah.
that affects everybody.
Hugely. Yeah, if they're not steering the ship in the right direction,
Exactly.
everyone's going to feel that.
It's a big deal, and I feel like that kind of gets lost sometimes
Yeah.
when you're not the one actually making those decisions.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like, oh, well, whatever the higher-ups decide. But it's like, no, this is actually a really big deal.
Yeah. And it's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day and lose sight of that bigger picture.
Right.
So having a CEO who can maintain that focus,
Right.
that's crucial.
So that's strategic leadership, but then the second area that they talk about is operational expertise. So it's one thing to have the vision. It's another thing to actually be able to make it happen.
Right, exactly. You need someone who not only has that big picture thinking, but also understands how to translate that into the day-to-day.
So how do you measure that? How do you know if somebody has that? What does that experience even look like?
Well, that's where things get really interesting because it's not just about looking for someone who checks all the boxes on a resume.
Okay.
Haptic emphasizes the importance of what they call experience and expertise with a capital E and a capital X.
Okay.
It's about looking beyond just years of experience
Yeah.
and really digging into what kind of experience someone has.
Oh, I see.
So, for example, a CEO who's really good at navigating a startup
Yeah.
might not be the best fit for a huge company that's been around for a while.
Right.
They're totally different skill sets.
So you have to think about the context of their experience.
Absolutely.
Not just that they have it.
Yes, exactly.
That's so interesting. I never thought about it like that.
Yeah, and this is where we start to see that kind of artistry that Haptic's talking about with the CEO selection process.
Yeah, the artisan analogy.
Right. It's about finding the right material to work with.
Mm-hmm.
Just like a sculptor wouldn't use just any block of stone for their masterpiece.
Right.
You need to choose the right CEO whose experience, personality, leadership style, it all needs to work with the company's existing DNA.
Oh, I love that. The company's DNA.
Yeah.
That's a really good way to put it because it's not just about, like you said, ticking boxes on a checklist.
Mm-hmm.
It's about finding somebody who fits
Exactly.
with what you're trying to build. And that kind of leads us into the next point that Haptic talks about,
Yeah.
which is talent and culture.
Right.
So the CEO has a really big impact on the company's culture.
They really set the tone for the whole organization, don't they?
They really do.
Everything from, who they hire to how employees feel about working there.
And ultimately, their ability to attract and retain talent.
Exactly. And that's not just an HR issue that directly impacts the company's bottom line.
Right, because if you can't attract the best people,
Yeah,
you're not going to be able to compete.
exactly. And when employees feel valued and heard and like they're part of something meaningful, they're going to be more engaged, more productive.
Right. It's all connected.
It is.
Which is so interesting. It's like all these different things that you might not think are connected are actually deeply intertwined. And when you're choosing a CEO, you have to think about all of them.
Absolutely. It's a huge responsibility.
It is a lot of responsibility.
And, speaking of responsibility,
Yeah.
Haptic actually gives this really comprehensive 12-point framework for how to go about choosing a CDO.
Okay.
We're not going to go through all 12 points right now, but we can use them to kind of dig a little deeper into this artisan approach.
Okay, so where do we start?
Well, a good chunk of those 12 points from Haptic really focus on making sure that whoever they choose as CEO really fits in with that company DNA we were talking about.
Right, like they really need to get it.
Yeah, they talk about shared values
Yeah.
and a deep understanding of the company culture. And I thought this one was interesting, making sure that everybody's on the same page about what the founder's role will be even after the CEO's in place.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah, you don't want any surprises down the line.
Yeah, you want to minimize those friction points right from the get-go.
Absolutely. And that focus on making sure everyone's on the same page that goes beyond just the executives at the top.
Right.
Haptic emphasizes how important a CEO's leadership style and their communication skills are for the entire company.
Oh, absolutely. It's like that saying, right? Culture eats strategy for breakfast or something like that.
That's the why.
Yeah, you can have the best strategy in the world, but if the CEO can't get their team on board,
Yeah.
if they can't communicate it effectively, it's meaningless.
It's all about bringing people together and getting them excited about a shared vision.
And being able to make tough decisions when you need to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hmm.
And that's where being able to manage change well is so important. And Haptic really stresses that.
Oh, definitely, especially these days.
Yeah. Things are changing so rapidly in the business world.
Constantly.
Technology, consumer behavior, everything's in flux.
Right, so it's not even enough to just be adaptable anymore.
Right.
CEOs need to be able to guide their whole team through those changes.
Exactly. They need to be comfortable with a certain amount of uncertainty and be able to make those tough calls when things get rough.
Which makes me think about the ethical side of leadership, too.
Right.
Because when you're making those tough calls, you need to have a strong moral compass.
Absolutely. And Haptic really emphasizes ethical integrity.
Sure.
They say it's non-negotiable.
I like that.
As CEOs, ethics, they set the tone for the entire company.
Totally. It's like what you were saying about culture.
Yeah.
But it's more than that now, right? It's not just about whether it's
Yeah.
a fun place to
They're
work.
bigger than that.
It's about how the company behaves in the world.
Yes. And people are paying attention. They're looking for companies that share their values.
Right. And leaders who walk the walk, not just talk the talk.
Exactly. And that authenticity, it's more important than ever these days.
Especially with social media.
Oh, yeah. One misstep and it's all over the news.
Exactly.
So you need a CEO who's not just going to make ethical decisions because it's good for business, but because it's the right thing to do.
It has to be genuine.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that ties back into that artisan analogy we were talking about before.
Right. Like it's about taking pride in your work.
Exactly. It's about building something lasting and meaningful.
And that takes time.
It does.
It's not about quick fixes or short-term gains.
It's about playing the long game.
Right. And that's not something you can...
And Haptic brings up another long-term consideration with succession planning.
Oh, that's important.
Yeah, it's not just about finding a CEO who's right for right now.
Right.
It's about making sure there's a smooth transition when that CEO eventually moves on.
So you're not just hiring a CEO, you're building a legacy.
Exactly. And that adds a whole other layer of complexity to the process, doesn't it?
It really does, because you're not just evaluating them on their current abilities,
Right.
but also their potential to mentor future leaders and leave the company in a good spot for the future.
It's a lot to ask of someone, but that's the kind of foresight that Haptic is encouraging companies to have.
Yeah. And speaking of foresight,
Yeah.
they have this one suggestion that I thought was really interesting and honestly kind of surprising.
What's that?
They suggest a trial period for new CEOs.
A trial period.
A trial period for a CEO. It's not like they're hiring an intern.
Yeah.
What's the thinking there?
It seems kind of strange at first, right? But when you really think about it, it's kind of brilliant.
Okay, I'm listening.
So Haptic argues that it gives both the CEO and the company a chance to sort of test the waters, before they fully commit.
So it's like a try before you buy, but for like the most important job at the company.
Exactly. The CEO gets to experience the company culture firsthand, actually work with the leadership team and see how things really operate day to day.
And at the same time, the company gets to see how this CEO actually leads, not just how they present themselves in an interview or whatever.
It's about making sure there's a real fit, on a personal level.
Because you could be amazing on paper,
Oh, yeah.
but if you don't gel with a team...
It's not going to work. It's not going to work. It's not good for anybody.
Exactly. And it's much better to figure that out sooner rather than later.
Absolutely. I think what I like most about Haptics' approach is how they take this process, which honestly, let's be real, it's often kind of secretive and stuffy, and they make it practical.
Cut through the noise.
Yeah, it's like they're saying, look, this is a big decision, but let's not overthink it. Let's be strategic, but also let's just be human about it.
Let's be real.
Yeah.
I like that. And I think that gets to the heart of what they're saying.
Yeah.
Choosing the right CEO, it's about finding the right fit
Yeah.
for the company, for the culture, for the future you're trying to build.
It's not just about finding somebody who looks good on a brochure.
Not at all. It's about finding someone who can truly lead. Well said. All right, so as we wrap up our deep dive into choosing the right CEO, what would you say is the key takeaway for our listeners, even for those who maybe aren't in a position to be making these kinds of decisions?
That's a good question. I think what's really cool about Haptics framework is that you can apply it to more than just choosing a CEO.
Oh, how so?
Well, a lot of the things they talk about, like clear communication, building a strong culture, ethical leadership, those are important for any kind of team or organization.
It's true, whether you're running a small business or even just managing a team at work.
Exactly. These are universal principles of good leadership.
So it's not just a guide for picking a CEO, it's like a masterclass in leadership in general.
I think that's a great way to put it. And maybe the most important takeaway is this idea that leadership isn't about having power, it's about having values. It's about inspiring others. It's about working together to achieve something bigger than yourself.
It's about leaving a legacy.
Exactly.
Well said. Well, we covered a lot of ground today, from the very real challenges of leading a company to some surprisingly practical advice and even a bit of artistic inspiration. I hope our listeners found it as insightful as I did. Until next time, keep diving deep.